The Match, from Miss Bracegirdle and Others, by Stacy Aumonier. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Michael Maggs. The Match. It is all so incredibly long ago that you must not ask me to remember the scores. In fact, even of the result I am a little dubious. I only know that it was just on such a day as this that we were all mooning around Bunty Cartwright's garden after breakfast, smoking and watching the great bumblebees hanging heavily on the flowers. Along the flagged pathway to the house were standard rose trees, the blossoms and perfumes of which excited one pleasantly. It was jolly to be in flannels and to feel the sun on one's skin, for the day promised to be hot. For years it had been a tradition for dear old Bunty to ask us all down for the week. There were usually 8 or 9 of us, and we made up our team with the doctor and his son, and 1 or 2 other odds and ends of chaps in the neighbourhood. I know that on this day he had secured the services of Dorkin, a very fast bowler from a town nearby, for Selminster, the team we were to play, were reputed to be a very hot lot. As we stood there laughing and talking, Bunty and Tony Peebles were sitting within the stone porch, I remember, trying to finish a game of chess started the previous evening. There was the crunch of wheels on the road, and a brake arrived, accompanied by the doctor's son, a thin slip of a boy on a bicycle. Then there was the usual bustle of putting up cricket bags and going back for things one had forgotten, and the inevitable chipping of Togs, a boy whose real name I've forgotten, but who was always last in everything, even to the order of going in. It must have been fully half an hour before we made a start, and then the doctor hadn't arrived. However, he came up at the last minute, his jolly red face beaming and perspiring. Some of the chaps cycled and soon left us behind, but I think we were 7 on the break. It was good to be high up and to feel the wind blowing gently on our faces from the sea. We passed villages of amazing beauty nestling in the hollows of the downs, and rumbled on our way to the accompaniment of lowing sheep, and the doctor's rich, burring voice talking of cricket, and the song of the lark overhead that sang in praise of this day of festival. It was good to laugh and talk and watch the white road stretching far ahead, then dipping behind a stretch of woodland. It was good to feel the thrill of excited anticipation as we approached the outskirts of Selminster. What sort of ground would it be? What were their bowlers like? Who would come off for us? It was good to see the grinning, friendly faces of the villagers, then to descend from the brake, to nod to our opponents, in that curiously self-conscious way we have as a race, then eagerly to survey the field. And is there in the whole of England a more beautiful place than the Selminster cricket ground? On one side is a clump of buildings dominated by the straggling yards and outhouses belonging to the Bull Inn. On the farther side is a fence, and just beyond a stream bordered by young willows. At right angles to the inn is a thick cluster of elms, a small wood in fact, while on the fourth side a low, grey stone wall separates the field from a road. Across the road may be seen the spire of a church, the fabric hidden by the trees, and away beyond sweeping contours of the downs. In the corner of the field is a rough pavilion faced with half timber, and a white flagstaff with the colours of the Selminster Cricket Club fluttering at its summit. Members of the Selminster Club were practising in little knots about the field, and a crowd of small boys were sitting on a long wooden bench, shouting indescribably, and some were playing mock games with sticks and rubber balls. A few aged inhabitants looked at us with lazy interest, and touched their hats. A little man with a square chin and an auburn moustache came out and grinned at us and asked for Mr. Cartwright. We discovered that he was the local wheelwright and the Selminster captain. He showed us our room in the pavilion and called Bunty Sir. Of course Bunty lost the toss. He always did during that week, and this led to considerably more chipping as we turned out to field. No one who has never experienced it can ever appreciate the tense joy of a cricketer when he comes out to begin a match. The gaiety of the morning, when the light is at its best and all one's senses are alert. The sense of being among splendid deeds that are yet unborn, and then the jolly red ball. How we love to clutch it with a sort of romantic exultation and toss it to one another. For it is upon it that the story of the day will turn. It is the scarlet symbol of our well-ordered adventure, as yet untouched and virginal, and yet strangely pregnant of unaccomplished actions. What story will it have to tell when the day is done? Who will drop catches with it? Who destroy its virgin loveliness with a fearful drive against the stone wall? As I have stated, it happened all so long ago that I cannot clearly remember many of the details of that match. But curiously enough, I remember the first over that Dawkins sent down very vividly. A very tall man came into bat. The first ball he played straight back to the bowler. The second was a yorker and just missed his wicket. The third he drove hard to mid-off and Bunty stopped it. The fourth he stopped with his pads. The fifth he played back to the bowler again, and the sixth knocked his leg clean out of the ground. 1 wicket for no runs. We flung the scarlet symbol backward and forward in a great state of excitement, with visions of a freak match, the whole side of our opponents being out for 10 runs, and so on. I remember the glum face of their umpire, a genial corn merchant, dressed in a white coat and a bowler hat, with a bewildering number of sweaters tied round his neck, glancing apprehensively at the pavilion. I remember that the next man in was the little wheelwright, and he looked very solemn and tense. The first 3 balls missed his wicket by inches, and then he stopped them. My recollection of the rest of that morning was a vision of the little wheelwright, with his chin thrust forward, frowning at the bowlers. He had a peculiarly uncomfortable stance at the wicket, but he played very straight. He kept Dawkins out for about 5 overs, then started pulling round to leg. The wicket was rather fiery, and Dawkins was very fast. The wheelwright was hit 3 times on the thigh, twice on the chest, and numberless times on the arms, and 1 ball got up and glanced off his scalp, but he did not waver. He plodded on, lying in wait for the short ball to hook to leg. I do not remember how many he made, but it was a great innings. He took the heart out of Dawkins and encouraged 1 or 2 of the others to hit with courage. He was caught at last by a brilliant catch by Arthur Booth running in from long leg. One advantage of a village team like Selminster is that they have no tail, or rather that you never know what the tail will do. You know by the costume that they have a tail, for the first 4 or 5 batsmen appear in complete outfits of white flannels and sweaters, and then the costumes start varying in a wonderful degree. Number 6 appears in a black waistcoat with white flannel trousers. Number 7 with brown pads and black boots. Number 8 with a blue shirt and brown trousers, and so on to the last man, who is dressed uncommonly like a verger. But this rallentando of sartorial equipment does not in any way represent the run-getting ability of the team. for suddenly some gentleman inappropriately garbed, who gives the impression of never having had a bat in his hand before, will lash out and score 25 runs off 1 over. On this particular occasion, I remember one man who came in about 9th, and who wore 1 brown pad and sand shoes, and had on a blue shirt with a Dickian collar but no tie, and who stood right in front of his wicket, looked grimly at Dorkin, and then hit him for 2 sixes, a 4 and a 5, to the roaring accompaniment of "Good old George," from a row of small boys near the pavilion. The 5th ball hit his pad, and he was given out LBW. He gave no expression of surprise, disappointment, or disgust, but just walked grimly back to the pavilion. Selminster were all out before lunch, but I cannot let the last man, the verger, retire. He was bowled first ball off his foot, before speaking of our wicket-keeper, Jimmy Galsworthy. Jimmy Galsworthy was, in my opinion, an ideal wicket-keeper. He was a little chap and wore glasses, but his figure was solid and homely. He was by profession something of a poet, and wrote lyrics in the Celtic twilight manner. He played cricket rarely, but when he did, he was instinctively made the wicket-keeper. He had that curious, sympathetic, mothering quality which every good wicket-keeper should have. The first business of a wicket-keeper is to make the opposing batsman feel at home. When the man comes in, trembling and nervous, the wicket-keeper should make some reassuring remark, something that at once establishes a bond of understanding between honourable opponents. When the batsman is struck on the elbow, it is the wicket-keeper who should rush up and administer first aid or spiritual comfort. And when the batsman is bowled or caught, he should say, "Hard luck, sir." At the same time, it is his business to mother the bowlers on his own side. He must be continually encouraging them and sympathizing with them, but in a subdued voice so that the batsman does not hear. And moreover, he must be prepared to act as chief of staff to the captain. He must advise him on the change of bowlers and on the disposition of the field. All of this requires great tact, understanding, and perspicacity. All of these qualities Jimmy Galsworthy had in a marked degree. If he sometimes dropped catches, and never stood near enough to stump anyone, what was that to the sympathetic way in which he said, "Oh, hard luck, sir," to an opposing batsman when he was bowled out by a long hop, or the convincing way he would call out, "Oh, well hit, sir," when another opponent pulled out a half-volley for 4. What could have been more encouraging than the way he would rest his hand on young Booth's shoulder after he had bowled a disappointing over, and say, "I say, old chap, you're in great form. Could you pitch 'em up just a wee bit?" When things were going badly for the side, Jimmy would grin and whisper into Cartwright's ear. Then there would be a consultation and a change of bowlers, or someone would come closer up to third man, and lo, in no time something would happen. But it is lunch-time. In the pavilion a long table is set, with a clean cloth and napkins, and with gay bowls of salad. On a side table is a wonderful array of cold joints, hams, cold lamb, and pies. We sit down, talking of the game. Curiously enough, we do not mix with our opponents. We sit at one end, and they occupy the other, but we grin at one another, and the men sitting at the point of contact of the two parties occasionally proffer a remark. Girls wait on us, and a fat man in shirt-sleeves, who produces ale and ginger beer from some mysterious corner. And what a lunch it is! Does ever veal and ham pie taste so good as it does in the pavilion after the morning chasing a ball? And then tarts and fruit and custard and a large yellow cheese. How splendid it all seems with the buzz of conversation and the bright sun through the open door. Does anything lend a fuller flavour to the inevitable pipe than such a lunch, mellowed by the rough flavour of a pint of shandygaff? We stroll out again into the sun and puff tranquilly, and some of us gather round old Bob Parsons, the corn merchant, and listen to his panegyric of cricket as played in the old days. He's seen a lot of cricket in his time, old Bob. His bony, weather-beaten face wrinkles, and his clear, ingenuous eyes blink at the heavens as he recalls famous men. Johnny Strutt, he was a good 'un, aye, and ye should ha' seen old Tom Kennett bowl in his time. 9 wicket he took 'gainst Calehurst, in the wood every time. Fast he were, faster than they bowl now. 4 balls he bowled fast, then he put up a slow. He shakes his head meditatively, as though the contemplation of the diabolical cunning of bowling a slow ball after 4 fast ones was almost too much to believe, as though it was a demonstration of intellectual calisthenics that this generation could not appreciate. It is now the turn of the opponents to take the field, while we eagerly scan the score-sheet to see the order of going in, and restlessly move about the pavilion, trying on pads and making efforts not to appear nervous. And with what a tense emotion we watch our first 2 men open the innings. It is with a gasp of relief we see Jimmy Galsworthy cut a fast ball for 2, and know at any rate we made a more fortunate start than our opponents did. I do not remember how many runs we made that afternoon, though as we were out about tea-time I believe we passed the Selminster total, but I remember that to our joy Bunty Cartwright came off. He had been unlucky all week, but this was his joy day. He seemed cheerful and confident when he went in, and he was let off on the boundary off the first ball. After that he did not make a mistake. It was a joy to watch Bunty bat. He was tall and graceful, and he sprang to meet the ball like a wave scudding against a rock. He seemed to epitomize the dancing sunlight, a thing of joy expressing the fullness of the crowded hour. His hair blew over his face, and one could catch the gleam of satisfaction that radiated from him as he panted on his bat after running out of 5. He was not a great cricketer, none of us were, but he had a good eye, the heart of a lion, and he loved the game. I believe I made 8 or 9. I know I made a cut for 4. The recollection of it is very keen to this day, and the satisfying joy of seeing the balls scudding along the ground a yard out of the reach of point. It made me very happy. And then one of those balls came along that one knows nothing about. How remarkable it is that a bowler who appears so harmless from the pavilion seems terrifying and demoniacal when he comes tearing down the crease towards you. Yes, I'm sure we passed the Selminster total now, for I remember at tea-time discussing the possibilities of winning by a single innings if we got Selminster out for 40. After tea, for some reason or another, one smokes cigarettes. We strolled into a yard at the back of the Bull Inn, and there was a wicket-gate leading to a lawn where some wonderful old men, whose language was almost incomprehensible, were drinking ale and playing bowls. At the side were some tall sunflowers growing amidst piles of manure. Someone in the pavilion rang a bell, and we languidly returned to take the field once more. I remember that it was late in the afternoon that a strange thing happened to me. I was fielding out in the long field, not 30 yards from the stream. Tony Peebles was bowling from the end where I was fielding. I noted his ambling run up to the wicket and the graceful action of his arm as he swung the ball across. A little incident happened, a thing trivial at the time, but which one afterward remembers. A batsman hit a ball rather low on the off-side, which the doctor's son caught or stopped on the ground. There was an appeal for a catch given in the batsman's favour, but for some reason or other he thought the umpire had said out, and he started walking to the pavilion. He was at least 2 yards out of his crease when the doctor's son threw the ball to Jimmy Galsworth at the wicket. Jimmy had the wicket at his mercy, but instead of putting it down, he threw it back to the bowler. It was perhaps a trivial thing, but it epitomised the game we played. One does not take advantage of a mistake. It isn't done. The sun was already beginning to flood the valley with the excess of amber light which usually betokens his parting embrace. The stretch of level grass became alive and vibrant, tremblingly golden against the long, crisp shadows cast from the elms. The elms themselves nodded contentedly, and down by the stream flickered little white patches of children's frocks. Everything suddenly seemed to become more vivid and transcendent. As if aware of the splendour of that moment, all the little things struggled to express themselves more actively. The birds and little insects in solemn unison praised God, or rather, to my mind, at that moment they praised England, the land that gave them such a glorious setting. The white-clad figures on the sunlit field, the smoke from the old buildings by the inn trailing lazily skyward, the comfortable buzz of the voices of some villagers lying on their stomachs in the grass. Ah, my dear land! I don't know how it was, but at that moment I felt a curious contraction of the heart, like one who looks into the face of a lover who is going on a journey. Perhaps a townsman gets a little tired at the end of a day in the field, or the feeling may have been due to the Cassandra-like dirge of a flock of rooks that swung across the sky and settled in the elms. The bat, cut from a willow down by the stream, the stumps, the leather ball, the symbol of the wicket, the level lawn, cut and rolled and true, all of these things were redolent of the land we moved on. They spoke of the love of trees and the wind and the sun and the equipoise of man in nature's setting. They symbolized our race, slow-moving and serene, with a certain sensuous joy in movement, a love of straightness, and an indestructible faith in custom. Ah, that the beauty of that hour should fade, that the splendour and serenity of it all should pass away. Strange waves of misgiving flooded me. If it should all be too slow-moving, too serene, if, at that moment, the wheels of the juggernaut of evolution were already on their way to crush the splendour of it beneath their weight. Ah, my dear land, if you should be in danger, if one day another match should come in which you would measure yourself against some unknown terrors. I was aware at that moment of a poignant sense of prayer that when your trial should come, it would find you worthy of the clean sanity of that sunlit field. And if in the end you should go down, as everything in nature does go down before the scythe of time, the rooks up there in the elm should cry aloud your epitaph. They are very old and wise, those rooks, They watched the last of the Ptolemies pass from Egypt. They moaned above Carthage and Troy, and warned the Roman praetors of the coming of Attila. And the epitaph they shall make for you, for they saw the little incident of Jimmy Galsworth and the doctor's son, shall be, whatever you may say of these people, they played the game. I think those small boys down by the pavilion made too much fuss about the catch I muffed. Of course I did get both hands to it, and as a matter of fact the sun was not in my eyes, but I think I started a bit late, and it seemed to be screwing horribly. Ironical jeers are not comforting. Bunty, like the good sportsman he is, merely called out, "Dreaming there?" But it was a wretched moment. I remember slinking across at the over, feeling like an animal that has contracted a disease and is ashamed to be seen. My mental condition was by no means improved by the cheap sarcasms of the young Booth or Eric Ganton. We did not get Selminster out for the second time, and the certainty that the result would not be affected by the second innings led to introduction of strange and unlikely bowlers being put on and given their chance. I remember that just at the end of the day even young Toggs was tired. He sent down 3 most extraordinary balls that went nowhere within reach of the batsman. The 4th was a full pitch, and a young rustic giant who was then batting promptly hit it right over the pavilion. The next ball was very short and came on the leg side. I was fielding at short leg, and I saw the batsman hunching his shoulders for a fearful swipe. I felt in a horrible funk. I heard the loud crack of the ball on the willow, and I was aware of it coming straight at my head. I fell back in an ineffectual sort of manner, and despairingly threw up my hands in a sort of self-defence. And then an amazing thing happened. The ball went bang into my left hand and stopped there. I slipped and fell, but somehow I managed to hang on to the ball. I remember hearing a loud shout, and suddenly the pain of impact vanished in the realization that I had brought off a hot catch. It was a golden moment. The match was over. I remember all our chaps shouting and laughing, and young Toggs rushing up and throwing his arms round me in a mock embrace. We ambled back to the pavilion, and it suddenly struck me how good-looking most of our men were, even Tony Peebles, whom I had always looked upon as the plainest of the plain. My heart warmed towards Bunty with a passionate zeal when he struck me on the back and said, "Good man, you've more than retrieved your muff in the long field." I know they ragged me frightfully in the pavilion when we were changing, but it was no effort to take it good-humouredly. I felt ridiculously proud. We took a long time getting away. There was so much rubbing down and talking to be done. Then there was the difficulty of getting Len Booth out of the Bull Inn. He had a romantic passion for drinking ale with yokels, and a boy had stuck a pin in one of Ganton's tyres, and he had to find a bicycle shop to get it mended. It was getting dark when we all got established once more in the break. I remember vividly turning the corner in the High Street and looking back on the solemn profile of the inn. The sky was almost colourless, just a glow of warmth, and already in some of the windows lamps were appearing. We huddled together contentedly in the break, and I saw the firm lines of Bunty's face as he leaned over a match, lighting his pipe. The grass is long to-day in the field where we played Selminster, and down by the stream are 2 square, unattractive buildings covered with zinc roofing, where is heard the dull roar of machinery. The ravages of time cannot eradicate from my memory the vision of Bunty's face leaning over his pipe, or the pleasant buzz of the village voices as we clattered among them in the High Street, or the sight of the old corn merchant's face as he came up and spoke to Bunty. Bunty had stopped the brake to get more tobacco, and he touched his hat and said, "Good night, sir, good luck to 'ee." Decades have passed, and I have to press back the spring of my memory to bring these things back. But when they come, they are very dear to me. I know that in the wind that blows above Gallipoli you will find the whispers of the great face that Bunty died for. Eric Ganton, young Booth, and Jimmy Galsworth, where are they? In vain the soil of Flanders strives to clog the free spirit of my friends. "Good night, sir, good luck to 'ee." Again I see the old man's face as I gaze across the field where the long grass grows, and I see the red ball tossed hither and thither, with its story still unfinished, and I hear the sound of Jimmy's voice, "Oh, well hit, sir," as he encourages an opponent. Times have changed since then, but you cannot destroy these things. Manners have changed, customs have changed, even the faces of men have changed. And yet this calendar on my knee is trying to tell me that it all happened 2 years ago today. And overhead the garrulous rooks seem strangely flustered. End of the match.